Good morning. We'll be doing an in-service for the Stryker Power Load system, coupled with the Power Pro and our new steer lock system that you've outfitted onto your units. It's a very intuitive system. I recommend that everybody takes the time, 15 minutes or so, to watch the video before they begin use of the unit. Make sure they fill out our checklist and that they feel comfortable with the unit. And probably the biggest piece of advice that I could give is to play with it and practice with it. It's very intuitive, but at the same time, it is a new system. And when we're talking about providing critical care, we want to make sure that you're just as much as an expert as I am within, I would say, probably a couple weeks of putting this into your vehicles. So if at any time you have any questions, make sure that you're voicing those questions or concerns and sending that up the chain of command so that if they do see an anomaly, we can document that and get you guys taken care of as fast as we can. So first things first, to extract the system, what you're going to want to do is depress this foot-in hitch release, and the key is depressing it fully. It's very common that folks will only depress it part of the way, and then they'll start to pull it out, and there's a little pin in there that eventually will take enough damage that we'll have to replace it. And so the key is that they depress it fully and pull the system out at the same time. Now, what happened with the unit? Can anybody tell me? Made a noise and it jogged up. Okay, those are the indicators that the system is working correctly. All right, if it doesn't make a noise, doesn't jog up, or makes that longer noise, that was a hydraulic recharging, what I would recommend doing is resetting the system and extracting it out again and making sure that you're seeing a very small noise and a very small raise off the floor. Now, it's like a drawer. It's going to go in and out as fast as I want it to go. The key being it's very smooth. And so if you've got a patient with a broken limb, they're going to feel a lot of this if we're not careful. So what I like to use is these wheels as my guides. As I'm coming out, I'll use that front set of wheels that after those wheels clear, I bring it to a nice slow stop. Same thing going in. I'll use my rear set of wheels as my guide that I can travel fairly briskly, but as those wheels clear, I slow it down, let it seat, and come to its fully rested position. Now, as we're bringing it out, once it's all the way out, you're going to get a green light indicating that you're in the correct position to unload. If you don't get that green light, it's not going to unload the system. You're not fully out in the loading position. Once we've got our green light, you're going to hold down your plus button. I will let you know there's no lifting needed at this point. This will sustain up to 700-pound patient in this position. Don't try and test it by putting, you know, 3 200-pounders on the foot section of this unit and see if it'll really hold it. Trust me, it'll hold it, but it's probably not going to do any good to anybody. So just trust that your equipment will cover that weight limit. As we're expanding our wheels, what's going to happen is once the wheels are fully deployed in contact with the ground, the antenna is going to talk with the loading system, say, I have the patient, I have their weight. Then you're going to see the forks from the loading system release it. Once that's done, we've got two separate ways to disconnect it. We have a small button here, which is a wireless disconnect. There is also a manual disconnect here on the top of the power loading system that can be used at any time. The wireless disconnect is like a car door. If you're pulling on the door and hitting the button at the same time, it's going to fight you a little bit. And so you would depress it, it will release it, and then you would bring the unit out. Make sure you bring the unit fully away from the system before you begin to lower it. Very common because you haven't had something sitting out of the back yet that you'll start to lower it while the forks are still there. So make sure you bring it all the way away from the system before you go to stow it. When we're stowing, you want to grab these red handles, bring them all the way up, and slide it in. Now there's some black bumpers right here on the inside of those arms, and you need to get them to the second level here. If they're right here in this first area, they're going to slide back and forth. Your doors are going to hit it. You want to bring it all the way up into that second area where it's a nice good brake for the system. When you're ready to go ahead and load the unit back up, bring this all the way out until we've got our indicator lights. We're in the correct position to load. Again, if that system is here, it's not going to lock in. It's not going to say that it's ready to engage the unit. Once we've got our lights, the key to this part is to follow. We've got some pins here, these silver pins on the inside of the unit, and those pins need to glide just above this rail. Now, if you're too high, it'll force you down, and it'll get in there, but you'll need a little pressure. And if you're too low, it will drag on the system, which again is probably more force than we're wanting you to apply. And so play with your positive and negative toggle to find that correct height. So as we guide it back into the system, if I only get one of my pins locked in, I'm still receiving amber. Until I get them both in is when I receive green. But you're either all out or you're all in. So you can only focus on one light, and that'll let you know. Now the system's going to work in reverse, where the forks are going to lift up the unit. Once the gurney senses that the loading system has its weight, that's when it retracts its wheels. Now, right there as it finished its function, it became very tight on the top. It's really essential that you let the system finish its complete range of motion and come into that nice and tight and everything together, because as it seats and sets into the transfer assembly and the anchor, it needs to be right there. And also, if it was a little bit further down as we go to send it in, we're going to run into a problem. Okay? Now, as we're guiding it in, I like to keep both hands here on the side. If we're on an incline left or right, very heavy, there's a little bit of play in the system, and there's a chance that it might not seat easily. It will re-correct itself and seat as you're traveling or as you move, but to get it seated at perfect every time, keep your hands on the sides of the unit. It's also key that if you had a combative patient, you want to make sure that you still have your hands on the equipment. We're going to guide it straight in, and we're going to seat it directly over the safety hook, which is still there at the end of the system. Okay, now it's fully seated. We've got an indicator light flashing here that our battery is receiving an inductive charge from the system. We've got green lights up front that is secured and safe to head down the road. Any questions so far with the powered operation of the system? For the video's sake, I'm going to continue through some of the troubleshooting, and then we'll start doing the hands-on portion for you guys. So, a couple different things that could happen. Probably the most common thing that we'll see in the field is that we have a unit that maybe has a dump that's broken, or it's a four-wheel drive unit, it's very high deck, and it expands the gurney to the limits of the height that the gurney will go. Well, because these wheels need to make contact with the ground to have that communication happen, you need to make sure that you're assessing the scene correctly and making sure that we don't want to load patients at that extreme of the gurney on rough terrain. Let's say they're 300 or 400 pounds. We need a lot more personnel to do that safely. And so we have a kind of a 5 to 10 second rule that you should practice finding maybe a safer place to park and load and unload, just for your own personal safety and your patient's safety as well. Obviously, there'll be times where you won't be able to make that decision. And so make sure that you can overcome what you find in the field with practice as well. So as we're expanding, our wheels, if we had a void in this area here, or it could be mud or sod that's very soggy and it's not going to apply any upward pressure to the system, these wheels aren't going to make contact. There's a control panel here on the side of the power loading system that has a power button, an up-down toggle, and a hydraulic dump. And at that point, the head end operator should be able to identify that we're not reaching all the way to the ground. Simply reach over and toggle down those power load forks. And then when it's at a very maxed out point, there's quite a bit of pressure on these pins. And so generally, I like to just use the manual release on the top, which is right here, release it from the system, and off you go. There's another way in which you can do that as well. Is by just applying a little bit of upward pressure, about 3 or 4 pounds of pressure on the foot section, will trigger the system into thinking that it is fully deployed. So especially on soggy ground, this is normally where I would recommend using this. As we're coming down, if I just lift up just a tad, it's going to trigger those forks down to come all the way down. the scenarios in which it might just be a little bit more challenging is we can simulate that by saying that this is the load height of your deck and this is the gurney at its highest position. Okay, and I'm going to need a partner to come up and show you guys how to do this correctly. In this case, what we would do is we would both take the head section of the unit and we're just going to ride it up like a ramp. Okay, now we'll still get it locked in, and that's really our only goal. Thank you, sir. The only goal is to lock those pins in, because even as you can see, we're still off the ground. The forks are going to take over from here. So really your goal with this system is just to make sure you get it engaged, and then the loading system will do the rest for you. And it overcomes that difference just fine. Now, there's obviously several different scenarios that can happen. There's a battery on your power cot. It is now charged in the system, but that's not to say that it couldn't be dropped, that over time that battery couldn't go bad and need a new one. There's also a battery inside the power loading system that receives an inductive charge. That battery too could, you know, after 3 or 4 years no longer function. And so you need to be able to manipulate this system unpowered. That's the great thing about the system, is no matter what scenario you find yourself in, you can always load and unload the unit and save that person's life, and then come back and assess what the issue with the system is and get it reported. So we can, you know, demonstrate that by removing our battery. The gurney has no power in it. I would then just hold in the manual release to bring my legs down, and again come over to the power load control panel, toggle it down, and again the wireless isn't going to work because the battery's out. I would use the manual release to release it from the system. So that's with the gurney without any power at all. Now we're going to go ahead and simulate how we would load it that way. And because this is a hydraulic that we're compressing, I see a lot of folks bend over and try and chainsaw that. Make sure we're getting into a deep squat and you're squatting that weight up with you to help maintain that spinal integrity. So you're going to help me out with that. So I'm going to hold in the manual release. We're going to lift up. He's going to compress that all the way up. And we're going to drive it in. Now once those wheels are on the deck, he can let go. There's no really, you know, there's nowhere for that system to go. The key is I'm going to hold this manual release in the entire time, because again, as I spoke earlier, it has to compress down to get all the way locked in to that system. If I would have let go of that manual release up here as I went to perform that, it's not going to seat down. It needs the weight of the unit to get that final last part of compression to lock into that hitch securely. Now, if our power loading system died for whatever reason, we would go ahead and get ready to extract our unit, and we had two things that didn't happen. It didn't make a noise and it didn't jog up. Make sure you never let it off of the deck without grabbing a partner and doing a two-person unload just the way that you would do with a traditional antler system. Again, we're going to use the manual release on the top, and off we go. So you've seen it where the cot is completely dead. You've seen it where the loading system is completely dead. At no time were you unable to load and unload this system and provide care for your patient. Now, it works very, very well. All the services we have running these love them to death, but this is something that when it does happen, it throws people for a little bit of a loop, because they'll use it for so long working well that it's very easy to just not remember some of these steps. There'll be some decals on both of your doors for powered and unpowered operation, so that anybody, you know, a very simple pictogram that everybody should be able to follow. But I would practice this as much as you can, trick yourself, try and create scenarios in which you need to overcome something and see how smoothly and quickly we can do that. There's finally a position in which the loading system could have a charged hydraulic, but for whatever reason the power is dead. And that hydraulic was charged, we brought it out, now we're up in the air. Now there's a hydraulic dump button on the side to help overcome that. The thing about it's not just a regular button that you would press like one of these others. because it's manual and you're releasing pressure, I recommend making a tool with your thumb and your index finger, finding that sweet spot on that hydraulic, and you'll know you have it once you see it begin to lower. You're going to reach under, grab the top of that red fork, and bring it down just enough for the unit to clear. Don't bring your hand up under here to compromise it in any way. And then again, grab that manual release, and off we go. Well, here at this point, if we're not watching what we're doing and we come back to load it, we could load it through those forks, which could get you in quite a bit of trouble. So make sure that before we go to load the unit, that this is fully depressed and ready to load. Now, again, with loading, we don't know if those lights are locked in or not, so you're going to have to physically verify that both pins are locked in and ready to load. And if you'll watch, the Power Cot will actually just take those forks with us as we go in. Again, I'm going to hold the manual release in so it slides and engages in, and we're all set to go. Finally, what we're going to hear is what we saw at the beginning, where that hydraulic is recharging. And as I go to bring it out, it's making too much noise. It's not the same noise. Just like we put a car in drive, we know it's in gear. Make sure that it sounds and feels correct. And that to me was an indicator that something was a little off. So just like in the beginning, all I would do is reset it, make sure that it sounds correctly after I reset it, and it's working the way it should. Bring the unit fully out. What we're going to show you next is what you would do if you ran into a mass casualty scene and you're running multiple calls on multiple different units. What we would do is we would then just take our power load unit. We're going to travel it all the way forward and make sure these forks sit all the way flush. Now, in my case, set up with a wall mount, I would then just put this locking arm here on the wall. In your cases, as they're going to be center mounts, you would screw those back into the ground. At this rate, anybody's X-frame gurney, power load compatible or not, can be used in this system just the way it is in that traditional antler. So again, you shouldn't ever be limiting yourself to not being able to help that patient. Now, when it's all the way forward, there's a partner to this button at the entire head section of this unit, and you would have to bring these forks all the way up, depress that button, and then slide it back out. If there were two of you, one of you could hit the button here and the other one up front, but not really necessary with that other button in the top. I would say probably lastly, is we're talking about the loading system, is make sure you keep it clear of debris the most that you can. I would say probably the only times that we've seen people very, confused or wondering what's happening is when we have debris in two areas. One of the areas is right here. We've got this small little detent with a roller on it. We had a patient or a customer that had an IV cap in there, and because that roller wouldn't come up, they couldn't get it to seat and lock. The challenge with that is with the gurney on top of it, it's hard to see that. And so we would recommend getting the gurney off of the system, taking care of your patient, then coming back and assessing what's going on with the system. Also at the very front, you can see that ramp and that small pin toggling. I've seen tape and other things in that area, which will again cause it to not seat fully down. And so just make sure that you're keeping it as clean and clear of debris as you possibly can. You can power wash the unit. It's ISP rated and sealed, so you can't penetrate it in any way. So don't be afraid of cleaning it. And just take care of it and try and make sure that we can maintain its functionality. There's also a small toggle here. We call them triggers. They're magnetic triggers. And what they allow us to do is they allow us to overcome any debris that's lodged and stopping this transfer assembly from moving. Again, they're going to be underneath the unit. And so the more familiar you are with those, how to activate those and slide this in and out, the easier it will be to do that with the gurney sitting on top of the system. Lastly, we're going to talk about the new steer lock function on your Power Pros. And that steer lock function can be activated by a trigger here or here. Once we activate them, the key is that to get those casters facing rear. That's the only place in which they're locked in. Once we do get them facing rear, we can set a brake or tow our gurney, and we're not going to have that side-to-side motion or those shopping cart wheels picking up debris as we go. And so I'll activate it, and I like to do a small circle with the unit. With a patient on there, that can be a little bit more challenging, so communicate with your partner to do that. And find the scenarios in which you like to already have it set. I find when we're putting a patient on the unit, having that set and one brake set has 4 solid contact points that the unit is not going to move while we're doing that, as I know they can have a chance to kind of get away from us, or we're relying on a boot or a leg to stop it. Let the equipment stop it. Again, the focus here is getting back to caring for the patient. You can just deactivate that and you'll get your side-to-side back as soon as you need it. And I think that would conclude the overview of the system.